Hi, this is Sophie Roth, co-founder of Bach Education, and I'm here with my colleague.
I'm Rakia Johnson, co-founder of Bach Education. And today this is part
Yeah.
three of To a Degree Education from A to Z.
And today we're going to bring you a lot of information. We're going to really cover in depth the historical context and cost of higher education. We're going to go over the history of higher education, who it served, the expansion of access, and how it's changed in order to finance a degree. We're going to also cover sort of the new value proposition of the cost of higher education, the value of a degree, and the modern sort of cost and how to mitigate that. We're going to compare and contrast what the degree cost for different generations, and we're going to do it within the macroeconomic context. So we're going to talk about stagnation of wages, other increases in other costs and goods, and what a degree kind of gives back to you now, the return on that investment. And I made a lot of notes because this is a well-researched podcast, and I do have them in front of me, so I'm going to reference them so I don't sort of butcher any statistics. But yeah, I basically went down a rabbit hole, and this is, I think, really important for people to understand in a greater context.
Yeah.
And like we said, like last episode, we very strongly believe that there is still value in a degree, but we do need to be intentional now, especially about what those costs are and what they mean for your future. So that's what we're going to get into.
I think I recently saw something that someone said, "Oh, I don't know, cost of living is so exorbitantly high from one generation to the next. It's just that people spend a lot of money on luxuries." And
like avocado toast or
right. Well, I mean, and he was like, well, housing's expensive.
Right.
And I was like, well,
not a luxury.
that would be a huge actual part of cost of living.
Yeah.
So it was like, if we take out housing, but even if you consider other things, the truth that you can buy a TV, like a 50-inch TV for $250, which is insanely inexpensive compared to when I was a kid growing up. Buying a TV would cost you, for that large of a TV, would be, not only would it weigh a ton, it would cost you thousands of dollars. And so someone's like, somehow we flipped certain things. So like housing was really inexpensive
before. And
housing was really affordable. And then luxuries were expensive, which makes sense.
Right.
And then now somehow we flipped where luxuries are actually fairly inexpensive compared to...
It depends. There's a pretty diverse index of consumer goods, and many
what
have
we
gone
consider luxury, right? Like, I mean, for some people, like to me, getting your nails done is a luxury.
For sure. Yeah.
But it is wildly more expensive.
Correct.
Than when, I was in high school and we would like to do a whole thing. Of course, also went to a salon that used to call itself Number 10 Nails.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was like they were kind of better.
Yeah, there was definitely a franchise. And that's probably why you'll never see us with like well manicured hands. So we're going to keep those off camera. But no, of course, the greater economic context of what we're living now is relevant to the cost of a degree. And basically it is conservatively 3 to 4 times more expensive now than it was for the boomer generation to go to college. And there are other costs that have sort of exponentially increased, including housing and certain consumer goods, food prices currently, books. Oh, the tech, not just tuition has increased exponentially, but the cost of attendance in general, which we'll break down also, has also skyrocketed. So it really compounds on itself what a degree costs you in terms of time and money, which we always say the reason why we want to be so intentional about the initial choice is that this is an investment of time and money. And that doesn't you don't always get a positive return on an investment. It could be a bad investment. So we need to be intentional about those choices. And I'll start with sort of the history of education. And it's a little dense. I'll try to go over it quickly. But I mean, originally in, pre-Renaissance even, a lot of universities were designed by religious institutions, and they were to train clergy, basically, or the absolute, highest level of elites in any society. And so it was very inaccessible, very exclusive. And really, you didn't start seeing sort of this broader access until almost like modern times, and especially in the US. So one of the big inflection points, and I mean, you still actually see a lot of the religious influence. They're a large portion of all universities are still religiously affiliated. So it's still present in today's experience.
Was not like a lot of religion in just public education in general.
Right.
Like typically that was the reason why public education became a thing, is so that people could read the Bible or be taught as a clergy person.
Yeah, I'm glad we were.
I say clergy person, like they were doing anything other than men being clergy.
Yeah.
But like clergy
just started cracking into that field now. But right, so you still see that as part of like the current experience in college, but now there are a lot more options for people who are not religious. But basically, one of the more important sort of modern inflection points was post World War II. So after the end of World War II, there was this big push for legislation like the GI Bill, which granted all of these veterans basically a ticket to college, right? And for the most part, free or very close to free. So they could use their GI benefits to attend college. And that really expanded access quickly to a new group of students. And so that really started the big push, I think, right, in the late 1940s, 50s. Then in 1960s, there was also what's called the Higher Education Act. And again, huge surge in both federal and state funding, and it granted access to a completely new group of people, maybe, lower income people who didn't have access to the money needed or the time needed to enter into education. So again, big surge during the end of the 1940s and then early 1960s. Then in 1972, it was the creation of Sallie Mae. And this was sort of a government-sponsored money market, financial market. And it basically made institutions more comfortable to give loans to students. And then that surged huge. In the 1980s, I think it was like just like massive. Well, actually, in the last decade, in the 2000s, debt increased by 265%. So the financing of it with private loans and stuff has been just like growing exponentially since the 1970s, where they created Sallie Mae. And from my perspective, the intention behind the Higher Education Act and the intention behind this Sallie Mae and the surge to encourage students to go to college, it was twofold. One was like the national defense perspective, where they thought the government thought it was really important to have intelligent, educated population so that we could sort of combat our enemies abroad, like China and Russia. And not enemies, but our competitors, I would say. So you need to have an educated population, otherwise you're not going to compete globally. So that was really the intention behind it. And they put money behind that intention. And so the entire point being getting more students educated through the higher education system totally makes sense to me. And I think the unintended consequence was you flood the market with a lot of new money. It's sort of like future money, right? Like, I'll take these loans now, and then in the future, I will pay them back. And so you're flooding the current market with future money, essentially. And then colleges reacted to this new supply and demand dynamic. And I think that's where you see this massive spike, right? So a lot more people are taking out loans. You see a lot more money within the higher education industry. And then what's a natural reaction in an industry where you have a lot more money? You increase prices. And so I think that's really when there was an inflection point of cost. And now colleges are like, wow, we have a lot of students. We need more administration. We need more staff. We need more ways to attract students. And so their costs start adding up, and then it rolls out to students. So you have more money, but you also, all of the costs increase too. And that's where I think the value proposition of a degree changes, right? So you're saying, take out money now, and in the future, you'll have a better paying job. And for those 1980s, 1990s, wages grew not as fast as cost grew, but they were pretty close, right? And now there's this massive discrepancy because we've not kept up, right? I think one of the statistics I read was that within this, maybe 3 to 4 decades, wages have only increased about 26%, and the cost of college has increased 188% on average. And so when you look at that gap, you understand the value proposition is just different now. So, right, historically, things have shifted, and I think that there's a really significant inflection point in the 1980s when that became pretty drastic, that gap started growing.
Well, if we're talking about salary money starting in, 72?
Yeah.
That's only 50 years.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's a little more than my lifetime.
Right.
Right? Like, or I guess total, like, 53 years. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of nuance in there, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you would talk about the GI Bill and how that was really only extended to certain GIs.
Oh, we should talk about that.
Pale ones.
Yes.
Right. And they didn't want to extend it the same with the housing. There's all these other things. And
there's caveats within that.
Right. Caveats within that, because while we expanded everything to everyone and gave more access, mm-hmm. I think an unintended consequence, or maybe it wasn't so unintended,
maybe a little,
was that there would be a lot more women and a lot more minorities who would take advantage of those loans because they couldn't really cap it. Right. Yeah. Like there was also laws in place to prevent
discrimination.
Outright discrimination, right? Mm-hmm. And so then and I think that's kind of where we look at it now, and it's like, well, women have outpaced men significantly when it comes to college, and that was, again, did they see that happening? Were they expecting that to happen? Did we know that was going to happen? Mm-hmm. It's very interesting, and still in some places, and I think we touched on it a little bit before, that STEM women are very underrepresented in a lot of STEM,
right.
Even though there's a lot more than there used to be, but it's still
underrepresented.
It's still underrepresented. So it's just very interesting in terms of, I mean, it's a short amount of time. 53 years is not really a long time. I mean, it is, but not really, right?
Right.
Like we're
if you really, it's like a blip in history, all in all. Yeah. And I think because it's such a short time frame, that I think generations have a really difficult time understanding that it's so vastly different for someone who went to college pre-1980s and someone who went to college, let's say, in the 2000s and onward. It is completely different value proposition now than it was pre-1980.
25 years.
And so I think that's why it's hard for people to really wrap their head around, well, if I worked through college, stop eating avocado toast and you can too. No, that's like it's an unrealistic expectation.
Right.
We have to really just set the narrative. It is not the same value proposition now as it was for previous generations. So based on our new normal, how do we access education in an intelligent way? And so the 2000s, man, the 2000s, that was like our era. It was rough. And it was rough. I mean, there were major like global economic downturns. So in 2001, very difficult obviously the Great Recession in 2008, my graduation year, was very difficult. And it really shook the education industry as well. And there was just, so in the 80s even it started, there was a massive downshift in federal and state funding, mostly state funding. And it was Reagan era politics or policies that really reduced the level of grants that the government was giving. Grants are free. You don't pay back a grant. You pay back loans.
Correct.
So it's obviously much better to receive grants than it is loans. And there was like a mix, right? Even in the 70s, 80s, people would have a mix of grants and loans to access college, finance their college. Grants went way down after the 80s, way down in the 2000s. And so now the majority of the financing is done by debt exclusively. Again, in the 2000s, that went up about 265%. And because it was drilled into our minds, you go to college, you invest in yourself, you earn more when you graduate. And theoretically true, but again.
And that was true at one point.
That was true.
Right.
It can still be true, but it is not the same return on investment so as it was before. And so now, so those were the 2000s. It was just depressing. I call the current time frame the reckoning. It's the reckoning. Now we've hit a ceiling. I mean, if it's
the bubble.
Yeah, we've capped out. Families have capped out of what they can afford. They're so price sensitive. Like, I think students, everyone's like, oh, who gives an 18-year-old a loan? I'm like, and then they blame the 18-year-olds. I'm like, well, the banks are also at fault if they're doing these sort of predatory loans, or it's a much larger portion of their financing than it was before for students. Again, not really blaming the 18-year-old victim. So I think
who's
now
completely unaware.
Correct.
Right.
It's hard to conceptualize that, even for adults.
Anecdotally, right? Like, so I have, friends who grew up in small towns, very, very intelligent people, which we would have been a loss without their brain power currently in the roles that they're
contributions.
Working. Right. Like, I mean, amazing work.
Yeah.
Federal work. So we're all experiencing the benefits of.
Yeah.
But coming from a small town, first generation college student.
Right.
Looking at a loan money, having no idea. This is the most money that they've ever seen.
Right.
Right. And having no clue in terms of like, what am I doing this money? Because you don't have to take out the maximum, right? You could take out what's smaller and what you can live on and what's eligible to pay back. Not knowing. Right. Because it's like, well, yeah, I'll have money. Yeah. The number of students who are taking out loan money, at least when I was going to school in the 90s, who were still taking care of their families with that loan money as well.
Right.
Very much happening way more than we're probably assuming.
That's a reality.
Right. Sure. Like that is true. Like they are feeding their families. Like not their own families because they don't have children, but
they're responsible.
They're responsible for, siblings and parents and just making it way for families. And
the burden on lower income people.
Correct. Yeah.
Much higher.
Right.
And this is really adding to this sort of wealth disparity in America too, because if you think about the burden of debt long term on lower income people, that's how they're financing their degrees. Wealthy families are not financing their degrees through debt. And so you're already a step ahead.
And can I just say as a caveat here?
Yes.
As people who worked in higher education that would offer scholarships are not meant to cover the cost of tuition. They're not. Yes. Scholarships are a marketing tool to get a student to go to your school versus going to another one.
Right.
That is what a scholarship is.
Yeah.
If you're being offered a $20,000 scholarship, just know that school does not they're offering that scholarship to everybody, knowing that not everyone's going to take them up on that money. Yeah. And the cost of that student going to that school is probably $5,000. Yeah. And that additional $20,000 is really just to get you in the door. So I think that's one of the big issues when people talk about scholarship. And scholarships are great. I'm not saying that they aren't great.
They're a tool.
They are a tool. They are meant for the school to use as a marketing tool. It's not necessarily to mitigate the student's cost.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and there's also huge misconception.
Right. And I'll get into like the cost and how it sort of So there's different pieces, right? So there's tuition costs, there's cost of attendance. There's also merit-based aid, there's need-based aid, and there's also these scholarships. And then all together it makes this financial package.
Right.
And we'll get into this a little bit later, but it's a high cost, high discount industry. And it's almost impossible to know in each individual school what your cost will be at each school.
Correct.
And so that makes it even more difficult for an 18-year-old to make a responsible decision on their investment, because you don't know until you've gotten your acceptance letter, you've done FAFSA, and then like a couple months before you start college, they're like, here you go, here's cost. And you have to scramble and figure that out. So anyway, I mean, I don't know. By design, probably.
It's also very interesting too that people don't understand. I didn't quite understand this either when I started school, because as I said, I stayed in a study lounge. Housing and how separate it is from the admission, and that is also a separate cost.
Right.
So again, people not knowing that process or that system.
Yeah. And again, by design. So let's go into sort of the comparison, right? Like the cost for different generations and how it's sort of broken down. But I want to give you some numbers, basically. And by the way, since the 1980s, cost has only gone up.
Right.
Much faster, at least 2 times the rate of inflation.
Again, this is my lifetime.
Yes, exactly. Our human lifetime. And 1980s. So, I mean, it has not stopped growing. And not only has it not stopped growing, it is just like a straight line now. It is straight up. It's barely sloped. And so, gosh, it's painful. But between about the 1970s and in 2023, we have public schools have increased about 177%, and private schools have increased about 158%. And this is based off of it's adjusted for inflation and for the time value of money. So these are today's numbers, basically. But public schools increased from essentially $3,500 a year to $9,700 a year, and that's like what the average student pays, not just like sticker prices, right? Privates increased from $13,000 to about $35,000.
So when you say paying for a public school, who's paying? Is that tax money? Like $9,000 per student tax money?
No, that is what a student pays.
Okay.
That's how much it's increased.
Oh, public education. I'm thinking
public
for
school.
Some reason I'm thinking of
no.
Elementary school. I don't know why.
No, these are costs of attendance of higher education institutions, both public and private. And, a lot of people are like, well, don't go to a private school. The cost of the private school I attended was the least expensive after financial aid packages than any of the public schools in state that I applied to. So that's not necessarily relevant.
Right.
And I always encourage people, I'm like, don't just apply to local schools. Don't just apply to in-state schools. Do apply to a variety of schools. Wherever you want to go, you don't know which one's going to be the most affordable, because this system is so convoluted. There's no way to know that. Most likely, your in-state public large college is going to be the most affordable, but not necessarily.
I would also tell students who are interested in like graduate work, like if you know you're going to go to law school, if you know you're going to go to dental school, if you know that you're going to go on to school after your bachelor's degree, choose your cheapest bachelor option. All of those schools have testing to get into. You can get a good law school as long as you test extremely well and have good grades in your undergrad as well. It's not like, you're going to go to, I don't know, Wallflower Blue.
Yeah.
Right. You want to go to a good school that's going to be inexpensive, and then spend money on your graduate degree, because you're probably going to get a better return on investment from that graduate program. Right.
And yes, that almost everyone.
Right.
If you're going to do a second degree, that's where you want to put the money.
That.
Oh, I know.
I'm like, listen, unless you have a secret vault of monies, like, don't go out of state for your undergrad if you know you want to go to law school.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, it's not very.
And I'll say, especially for like first generation students, I think that earning an undergraduate degree is kind of as far as their sort of dreaming might go.
Right.
Which, that's very realistic to be like, I can get myself an undergrad degree, but then do they think farther than that? Like, I didn't think I would get a master's degree necessarily. I'm so glad that I did, and that I thought maybe I was worthy of it. But I didn't know that I was capable necessarily when I was an undergrad.
That's true.
So, something to think about.
That is true. I remember when I would talk to students and I would be recruiting for programs and they were like, oh, I didn't know I could. I'm like,
I could.
Yeah, actually,
you're allowed. Yeah.
You can get your MBA.
Yes.
Like, really? Like,
yeah.
So, yeah, that's a very good point, too.
Yeah. But that long-term planning, again, at 18, kind of a hard choice. But so things have really exponentially increased. And like I said, borrowing is now a much bigger piece of that sort of financing puzzle for students. And on average, and this is 2025 numbers, students graduate with about $30,000 of debt. I mean, I can tell you in 2008, I graduated with more than that. So, and that was the most affordable option. So, $30K, take that with a grain of salt, and people are graduating with a lot more than that.
Right.
You could, into the hundreds of thousands.
And that's just the bachelor's. Right. That's not considering borrowing for a graduate.
For future studies. Yeah.
Right.
We're only talking about undergrad. And so if you imagine how much all this compounds, just like interest.
Which I think is,
I know,
unlawful. Like, I feel like the government charging that significant amount of interest is predatory.
I mean,
and they have stopped other companies from charging that amount of interest, but it's perfectly fine for you can do dollar for dollar, or even 2%.
Yeah,
2% interest would be fine.
Yeah,
there are people who are paying back more than what they borrowed.
Oh, absolutely, they're only paying interest.
Right.
Yeah. And I believe the hypocrisy of some religious institutions accepting what is essentially usury as part of the equation seems like hypocrisy, but that's fine. They can read the Bible and make their own determinations. So, there's a lot of nuance to it, but cost is more expensive, both living and tuition, and financing is a larger part of it. So obviously you're going to increase debt. And so now we have an entire generation just absolutely crippled by student loan debt.
Okay.
And it does not go away. You can't just bankrupt yourself out of it. It's forever looming over your head. So it's really difficult. So now we enter back into the reckoning. And I think the narrative's changing. It's not just take as much debt as you want. It's not just go to college and that's the only path forward. I think a lot of people are really coming to terms with, we need to understand the return on investment of a degree. We need to make sure that we invest in ourselves in a smart way, and it's not just student loans. For instance, I at one point wanted to do my master's degree, but I was already more than $30,000 in debt. And I was well, I can't yet. So either I wait until I pay it off in 5 to 10 years, or I find another path. And the path I found actually, I think, is pretty creative. But I went to work at a university, which is where we met. And they had a benefit for employees where you get basically discounted or free tuition. And I was just so thankful that I found that path. And I worked full time, went to school at night, did it super slowly, but I finished an MBA in 3 years with no additional debt while I paid off my undergraduate debt. And so I think there's ways to think about, how do you invest in yourself in the smartest way possible? And I'll get into that.
Also, how I got my master's degree as well was working at a university and taking advantage of their tuition discount at the university, which is a really, really, if anyone is looking for an option,
they're going to have so many applications.
It's such a really great option if that's something that you're interested in. And depending on the college campus that you're going to, you're not going to make a lot of money.
Oh no,
you're not.
These benefits are the way that you close that.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not earning a lot.
Right.
But one of the things that I love about working is that I recruited international students and allowed me to travel internationally in different countries.
Right.
which traveling is better when other people are paying 1,000%. And so, I mean, that gave me an opportunity that I most likely would never have got to experience before. And so just knowing that is even domestic travel, like even if you're a person who like has a particular territory within the US that you travel to all the time, again, being able to travel where someone else is paying your
hotels, meals,
your meals. And then you get to go to like San Diego for a conference. Woo. And then, just get to, and that's where you make really good friends with coworkers, because then they are fun trips. Where you're also doing work as well. So that's always, I always tell people, and college campuses, there's big campuses have a ton of jobs.
I have a little of everything. And honestly, like, great job for your 20s.
Yes.
I mean, we had a great time in our 20s. I wouldn't do it now, right? But
although at one point we did go to California. And then we were like, we're going to stay and like hang out. So I think we had the conference in San Diego, and then we
hung out in LA.
And so he was like, because at this time we were working at the campus. It was like 15 minutes from the airport. The international airport. And she's like, listen, we'll just come back early Monday morning and just go to class. And I was like,
vicious.
Girl, I'm over 30. That is not going to work out for me.
That was a rough week the following week.
It was fun though. I had a good time.
I will also say, sort of unrelated, but part of working full time and earning a degree at night, and I was in a relationship and we were getting married, so we were engaged.
Newly got married too.
Well, the weekend that I got married, I brought my study materials because I had a final 2 days after I got married, 2 or 3 days after I got married. And my fiance husband was like, are you bringing a book to our wedding? I was like, oh no, I really have to study. And so, you squeeze in all of your life at one time.
You do it.
So you go on these trips and you fly back. And
you guys waited for your honeymoon, right?
Yeah, we waited until we paid off our student loan before we took a honeymoon. So all those people saying millennials eat too much avocado toast, like,
that's the problem.
Most of us are scrimping and saving and trying to
and starting a life, right? Like getting married, that's a cost. That's important.
So, but it was the right choice, I think, for both of us to work at a university in order to mitigate the cost of a master's degree. And I think you're seeing during the reckoning all of these students and people really finding creative ways to finance what used to be like something you could finance with a summer job. So a minimum wage summer job. So you could lifeguard all summer for 100 days of summer and then start school in the fall and just pay your entire tuition with that money. That's not the scenario.
Not so distant past.
Right.
Yeah.
And
during our
lifetime. And so I think, the greater context of the economic stagnation of wages, the sort of untenable amount of debt, the increase in inflation, housing prices, spike in food and some consumer goods, and just like massive technological shifts that have really destabilized the labor market in a way. I mean, the value proposition is completely different. And we need to understand the current value of a degree. And it is not the same as the value from a generation ago.
You just hit on something that I had not thought about, which could be part of your search here. Right? Like my cousin who just finished law school, she said that COVID wouldn't let her be great in her undergrad because it was her senior year.
Sure.
When COVID hit, and she in her undergrad, and she was supposed to do a study abroad, and she didn't because couldn't travel, right? And then it just occurred to me, I'm like, what was that cost to campuses with housing? Because no one was on campus.
Yeah. Or they got trapped on campus.
And that was wild, right? That was not a thing colleges remotely could have anticipated this everything is online now sort of thing.
Yes.
So there were, obviously online classes had been existent for a long time. Yeah. People like to think that online classes is new. People were doing like tele courses back in the 80s. Like that's not not in-person class was not a new concept in the 2000s.
Right.
But yeah, I wonder, how did that affect housing? Did students get their money back because they couldn't go on campus?
I'm going to take a risk and guess. No. Nobody got
they were
a refund.
Not refunded.
Nobody.
Because I think at the beginning they kept like pushing it out, right?
Yeah.
And I could even wonder like what that meant for international students. What if you're an international student, you went home, and you couldn't travel anymore?
Right.
And then working in the immigration, we had people who were stuck here because they couldn't get flights home.
Right.
So it's like, hey, like, yeah, my status has ended. I should have left the country a week ago. In fact, I had a flight booked a week ago, but I can't leave.
The world paused.
Right. So, like, it's just a very, I just didn't think about that. I'm sure I'll have to ask. I'll touch base because I know for recruiters, it was really, really difficult.
Right. You can't travel. No one else can travel. And you have no idea what campus life is going to look like. How are you going to... It's going to be great. You can definitely wear a mask in your room by yourself and never go to class. How's that sound for
even locally? Right? Like, not locally, but even traveling from Dallas to Austin.
Yeah. Who knows? No, and there's been a lot of instability in the last decade. And so, that's definitely something that has to factor into the value proposition as well. One thing, so we can all agree basically, like the way that boomers experienced higher education, basically they could essentially work a minimum wage job full time for the summer, and it would essentially pay for their cost of tuition. And in general, even once they've graduated, let's say they graduated and they had to continue working a minimum wage job. So the hours that it would take would be about 1,400. And I looked this up. It's about 9 months of work. So if you had like no other expensive, let's say you went home and lived with your parents, in 9 months, you could pay off all of the tuition that you had earned, or the whole cost of your college for the last 4 years. Millennials, it's more than 3 times that.
Wow.
And then same thing, but if you had graduated, and this is where the discrepancy comes in, if you had graduated as a boomer with and then gotten the median salary as soon as you graduated, which was true, like you could just have a paper resume, walk into a business, wave that bubby around and tell them you got a degree somewhere, no questions asked, and they're like, sit down, you got a job, you're the VP of sales. And like they would make at the minimum like a median income. And if that rate, then it only took 3 months of work to pay for their degree.
They bought a house for like $25,000.
Correct. And then if a millennial, let's say, didn't graduate in 2008 and was capable of earning a median income after they graduated, then it would take 1,000 hours. So you're talking about 400 hours versus 1,000 hours to pay it off. And that's like the average college experience. Most people are paying more than that. So it's very different. And I think now the number of hours it would take to pay just tuition, that does not include room, board, so no food, no shelter, no clothes, no books, just tuition, would take a student today would need to work 51 hours per week for 52 weeks a year. Basically no time off.
At what salary are we talking?
That's at minimum wage, federal minimum wage.
Minimum wage, yeah. That's not a real number.
Yeah. So at federal minimum wage, you would have to work overtime every week for 52 weeks without a day off, without a holiday off, basically.
People are lazy.
And so when people are like, people are lazy and you should be able to pay off your college, you wouldn't have enough time to attend college full time. That doesn't even include food. So what are we talking about? That's not a realistic number. So it's not possible to pay your way through college. I want to leave that there. It is not possible to pay your way through college. So,
nor is it super cute that we just starving college student. Like, we just really funnily make fun of the fact that people don't eat.
Yeah. You need to eat and sleep somewhere and not be homeless and couch surf and eat out of food pantries at colleges.
Right.
Like, that's normalized now. Yeah. And, like, thankful that that colleges are addressing the problem to a degree. But you know what would help would be, like, lower your costs.
So that I don't have to rely on you.
So that your student isn't getting donated food out of a food pantry. Like, that's wild.
Listen, this was always, and this might be a really good place to stop, and then we can start in more on your numbers in a little bit. Not in a little bit, but, we can continue this conversation. But whenever I would have events on campus, always made sure there was food.
So much food.
And I would always, like, let people go home with their food.
Yes.
Because we knew, like, it was, hopefully they would be eating.
Yeah.
And it's not cute.
It's not cute. It's not normal. And I'll kind of wrap this up here. But basically, I want to talk about today. Let's discuss how the model works today. So at this point, we have a high tuition, high aid model, or another way to look at it is high cost, high discount. I was talking to, like, a financial planner, and that's how they describe the college industry when they're talking to parents who are sort of saving for the future. And so it is really hard to understand what the real cost of college is. And I think there are certain industries in the U.S. like that, like, for instance, healthcare, that are really designed in a way, and taxes, where you couldn't know what you will potentially owe, and you're just going to have a surprise bill at the end. But when people look up numbers, in general, you see what's called a sticker price of college tuition. Almost no one's paying that. That's a minority of students, and we could pretty much assume most internationals are paying that, and some very wealthy students, domestic students, are paying that. But for the most part, people are paying a much different adjusted rate. And that's a combination of loans, which, by the way, makes it seem like they're not paying, but they are literally paying that plus interest eventually.
Right.
Loans, need-based scholarships, merit-based scholarships, and if you're lucky and you get the very small amount of grants left in America, then that's part of your aid package. And it all kind of comes together. You fill out the FAFSA, you plug in your parents' tax situation, and then you spits out a number that the financial aid department at every individual college reassesses. And then they put together a full package for you. And so if you're admitted, that's the process you go through, and then you get some sort of adjusted price. But it's really hard to understand that. And I was like, what's the most expensive college right now? I was like, do you want to take a guess?
The most expensive college?
Just like tuition. Or no, sorry, cost of attendance. With cost of attendance.
This is a wild stab. I'm going to say SMU.
No, but
it's really expensive.
It is. They would actually enjoy paying the higher sticker price, I feel like, than most students. It is Northwestern. I actually was kind of surprised by that.
Wow.
Followed by University of Chicago and Columbia University. All the top 10.
University of Chicago?
It's these are all very prestigious universities. They are giving you a very top level education.
Northwestern is also in Chicago?
Northwestern is, yes, maybe Evanston, right nearby.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting for Illinois.
Yeah. So, these are very high prestigious universities. I'm not knocking them, but it is obscenely expensive. So the most of them are in Chicago, East Coast, like one in Pennsylvania. Most of them are in New York and a couple in California.
So do you know how much it costs to go to Northwestern?
Oh, yes, I do. I wrote that down. So on the full sticker price of Northwestern, $89,000 a year. That's right. That hurts, right?
I thought you were like, for 4 years. That's a lot. A year?
Yearly.
What are you living in?
Not a mansion. Because have you seen dorms?
Yeah, I've seen dorms, and then I've seen like
SMU dorms.
right. UT, I forget what it's called now.
There are higher level option. This is like
Right.
average annual cost of attendance. Not average, I guess, but like what it could be, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
So $90,000 per year.
A year to study.
So you're looking at 90 times 4, I don't know, 60? Oh,
it is so expensive. Again, most students, majority of students, this is not the cost that they're paying. And I did look at averages. Average net cost currently at public universities is $20,800. Private schools is $36,000. And the average sticker price, not for the most expensive, for public is about $30,000, and for private is about $63,000. So not a huge discrepancy with public schools, but there is a big gap, about half for private schools. But again, it's so hard to plan and think and save and take out the right loans and do things when you're not sure what costs are.
It's going to be.
When you can't anticipate costs. So how do you know if going to this public school is better or going to that private school is better or going abroad is better?
Right.
So what I've seen during the reckoning is, there's the saying, desperate times call for desperate measures. And I'm like, no, desperate times call for intentional measures. That's how we have to pivot. That's how families are pivoting. So you take college courses in high school, essentially, or you take community college courses, and with the intention of reducing the amount of time you spend in a 4-year university. Because if you can graduate in 3 years, you're saving potentially $89,000. So
yeah,
it's important to maybe reduce the amount of time that you're away from the corporate environment where you can earn back money. You want to make sure that you're knocking out as many of those sort of filler courses as possible. You have to be really careful about transferability, because I doubt Northwestern's going to accept a lot of community college credits. I just don't think they will. And so you do have to be careful about that, but that's a plan. That's a creative way to do it. Of course, apply and use FAFSA. Don't let one scholarship drop out of it. Make sure that every school that you want to attend, even if it's public or private, apply to it. You don't know what your financial aid package is going to be. And then I really want to push this, and this is what we push at Bach University, or at Bach Education. Look at international options. There are schools abroad that offer free degrees that are taught in English. And so it behooves families to look into every option internationally. And these are not bare bones. I don't want to say bare bones, but they're not going to have like a lazy river for student services. Like, these are colleges. You go to school, you go to class, you turn in stuff. You're not going to have a ton of administrative staff and support. You're not going to have these like really elaborate dorms and like, again, gyms and things like that. But you're going to pay a fifth of what you would pay here. And so that has to be something that people are researching.
And it, again, your return on investment may not just be money, right?
Yes.
So to be able to do that in a foreign country where you're learning a second language, where you're getting into the culture, where it gives you an opportunity to work internationally, which gives you a leg up on, someone else.
On global companies.
On global, global organizations, which is becoming much more the norm.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, there's a lot of ways to mitigate it during the reckoning until colleges catch up and realize, oh my gosh, like we've hit the ceiling. We can't charge people $100,000 a year.
Some people have hit the ceiling to the point of like, we're just not going to charge anybody now.
Yes, and there are schools popping up even in the U.S. that are just going to be free of charge. And I think as a society would be very important to emphasize that.
Essentially going back to, right? Like, because at one point, college was free.
Or for all intents and purposes.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, a college where you could market yourself as you work full-time in the summer and you can pay your full tuition for the year, and then you can work part-time, like little jobs during the year and focus on yourself and focus on earning a degree and then graduate with no debt. That's the value proposition we want to get back to. I would hope that schools are trying to find a way back to that. And so hopefully with increasing international competition, schools here are going to kind of contract and react to that. But yeah, this is pretty dense information. It's not like super positive outlook, but I think that because we're in a space now where people are just sort of fed up and they're just not going to accept the current value proposition, we're in a much better place, I think, going forward. So I'm optimistic about it.
I don't think it is negative, actually. I think it is negative for colleges. I think colleges need to figure something out.
Yeah.
But I think that's the reaction that most people have socially with lots of things. Like, people don't want to spend their money at things that aren't going to socially give them value, right? Like, people are like, yeah, I can live without Amazon. I'll figure it out, right? Like, we've lived our lives without Amazon. And I can't think of the comedian now who was talking about Amazon Prime Now. And he was like, I want it now. I want it now. I want to think about it, and I want Amazon to deliver it. Yeah. And it's silly, right? Like, you're paying so much extra money to have something delivered to you within 2 to 4 hours. I'm like, I could wait a day.
Yeah.
Like, I really could. Or I would like to go to the store, but a lot of times because of inventory, this makes me so angry. I was like doing some renovations to the house. Not a lot. And looking at faucets. And I'm at the Home Depot or the Lowe's. I don't know. One of them. And, I'm looking at these faucets they have on display, and it says online only. Online.
Oh, right.
And I'm like, yeah. So all of these that I'm looking at aren't the ones that you're showing me here. Why am I in the store? So stores have made it even harder to just, Yeah. And I think people are getting to a point, where it's like, I don't want to do that. Like, I would like to go to the store and buy it now.
Yeah.
And then go home with it.
Yeah. And that instant gratification is something that's like hard to understand because it's 4 years, right, of your life to get a degree. And there's not really any instant gratification. So it is something to think about as well, because people are more used to it the other way. But I am optimistic. I think even though this might have been dense, I hope it's, very helpful to everyone. And yeah, that's our latest episode of To a Degree. Thanks for joining us.